And so, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm going to turn this off now because it's quite loud. I'm Spy Knight, and in this podcast, I love talking all things movies and TV, and what I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing the new Star Wars Disney Plus series, which is, of course, Skeleton Crew. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? So, Skeleton Crew, as I've already said, is this new Star Wars Disney Plus series, and from what I've heard, I don't know if I'm 100% correct here, but from what I've heard, this series is meant to be set around the same time as the last season of The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and the Book of Boba Fett. It's set after the event of Return of the Jedi. However, and this is important to note, this series has almost no connections to any of the TV shows I've mentioned whatsoever. It has connections to Star Wars. It very much feels like a Star Wars TV show in my opinion, but it doesn't have any connections to really it almost has no connections to any of the previous Star Wars Disney Plus shows. And I must admit, I wasn't terribly excited about this series, especially after The Acolyte, which wasn't for me. You know, the latest Star Wars Disney Plus series, I was left quite disappointed by. It wasn't for me. I know it has its fans. I know there are people who really like Acolyte, and if you do, that's great. I don't want to take that away from you whatsoever. Too many people do, but Acolyte wasn't for me. So I was hesitant about another Star Wars Disney Plus series because it feels like we haven't had a great one in a while. I enjoyed Ahsoka, I enjoyed Mandalorian Season 3, but they weren't great. And I was worried that this was going to be another meh Star Wars Disney Plus show. But I have to admit, I was intrigued in this show at the same time. And the big reason I was intrigued in Skeleton Crew, I was intrigued about watching it, was because of Jon Watts. If you don't know who Jon Watts is, he is the person who directed, probably most famously directed, the Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. And I didn't love those films, and actually those films have gone down in my estimation over recent years, but those films are clear evidence that Jon Watts knows how to direct, and he knows how to work with big studios like Disney and like Sony, who both, collaborated on the Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. And Jon Watts seems to be the driving force behind this series. From what I've heard, and again I don't know if I'm 100% correct here, but from what I've heard, he pitched the idea for this show to Kathleen Kennedy, the head of Lucasfilm, and she said, go ahead with it. So, he seems to be the driving force behind this series, and he had my interest. I'm not a huge fan of Jon Watts, but I wanted to see what he was going to do in the world of Star Wars. And another reason I was intrigued in the show is because of the directors who have directed the episodes of this series. Like, you have Jon Watts, who I've already spoken about, who directed the first and last episode of this series, and you have David Lowery, who directed The Green Knight, which seems so, so different than anything Star Wars. I mean, I love The Green Knight. I thought that was a really good movie. But, yeah, The Green Knight is not, you wouldn't, put it this way, you wouldn't think that the director of The Green Knight would direct something in the Star Wars galaxy. So that was a surprise to see that David Lowery had directed 2 episodes of this series. You also have Lee Isaac Chung, I think that's what the director's name is, who directed Minari, which was an Oscar-nominated film a couple of years ago. You had the Daniels, the Oscar-winning directors who made Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed one of the episodes of this series, and you have Bryce Dallas Howard, who in my opinion has directed some of the best episodes in Star Wars TV period, directing one of the episodes of this series. So with those directors attached, I was like, actually there could be something here. Even if the writing isn't the best, I'm going to be curious as to see what the filmmaking, what the directing is like in each episode of this series. So like I said before, I wasn't terribly excited about Skeleton Crew. I wasn't really looking forward to it too much, but I was interested. I was interested because of the creators involved in this show, like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, who are also involved in the show as well, and they're the people, who worked on Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, and The Mandalorian, shows which I, at the very least, enjoyed. Yes, I did enjoy Ahsoka, and yes, I did enjoy the Book of Boba Fett. I thought those shows were entertaining, not great, but entertaining. But I wanted more from Skeleton Crew. I have been wanting more from Star Wars TV for a while now, and I was hoping to get that. So over the past 7 weeks, I have been watching Skeleton Crew as it's released weekly on Disney Plus. And the series, if you don't know already, basically follows a group of kids who live on this planet called At-Atin. That is important. They live on this planet called At-Atin, and they find an abandoned spaceship on this planet. And they accidentally get it working, and this spaceship takes them outside of their home planet and on an adventure which makes these kids run into pirates, to different creatures and aliens in the Star Wars galaxy, to see different parts of the Star Wars galaxy which they don't really know about, and which are quite a surprise to them because they haven't left At-Atin before. At-Atin, which is the planet they come from, is quite a closed-off planet. Not to go into too many details, because that's one of the big things in the series. It's a closed-off planet, so they haven't left the planet before, and now they're going to all these different parts of the Star Wars galaxy, and it's all very new to them. And at the same time, they meet Jude Law's character named Jude along the way, and you don't know whether to trust him or not. He's a bit of a Jack Sparrow, Long John Silver type character. You don't know whether to trust him or not, and he has the Force, at least they think he has the Force. But is he a Jedi, or is he a pirate, or is he a good guy? You don't know whether to trust him or not. And he joins in the adventure as well alongside these kids. And you have this subplot surrounding the parents of these kids who are trying to get their kids back on this planet called At-Atin, but are struggling because the planet is so closed off from everything else. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about Skeleton Crew. And honestly, like I said before, I wasn't that interested in watching this series. But I am so happy to say that I ended up loving it. I mean, I didn't love it quite as much as I loved the Andor TV series. That was one of my favourite TV shows to come out the past decade. But as far as Star Wars TV series goes, and this sounds like faint praise, but it's not. As far as Star Wars TV series go, this is a really, really, really solid one. And I loved watching almost every episode of this show because it awoke the inner child in me, the inner child that fell in love with Star Wars. And none of the other Star Wars TV shows really did that. I mean, Mandalorian did it to a certain degree, but I love Mandalorian for different reasons. Skeleton Crew brought out the inner child in me that, the inner child that originally fell in love with Star Wars in the first place. And clearly I'm a big Star Wars fan, if you hadn't guessed that already. I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. Look at the stuff behind me, and I had a lightsaber out of the intro in this video. Clearly I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I was watching this series and it had that same magic and wonder that Star Wars had in the first place for me, that made me fall in love with Star Wars. And I've been missing that with Star Wars TV shows for the past couple of years. And I'm not saying this show doesn't have its flaws, and I'm not saying it's one of the best, actually no, I do think it's one of the best Star Wars TV shows, but I'm not saying it's as good as the Andor TV show. I still think the Andor TV show is the best Star Wars TV show to come out of the past, to come out since Star Wars started to do TV shows. And I don't think it's quite as strong as Mandalorian Season 2, but I think I prefer it over Mandalorian Season 1, and I definitely prefer it over Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka and The Acolyte, and I'm so happy to say that. And the reason I enjoyed it so much is because there was magic and there was wonder in there, and you felt like you were going on an adventure with these kids. And I loved that about it. I love anything where you feel like going on an adventure. It's one of the reasons I love the Indiana Jones movies so much, because they are just classic adventure films. It's one of the reasons I love the Star Wars films so much, particularly the Star Wars movies where you truly feel like you're going on an adventure with the characters. I felt like I was going on an adventure with these kids every single week. You know, like I said before, it does have its flaws, and one of my flaws with this show is I would have liked the episodes to be longer, because at times it does feel like we're accomplishing a hell of a lot in 30 minutes, because each episode of the series, or most of the episodes in the series, are about 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes long. But it feels like we're accomplishing a hell of a lot in a short amount of time. And part of me really likes that, because the series moves at a pace, and not every Star Wars TV show before this did. You know, Ahsoka did not move at a pace. But at the same time, it feels not like we're rushing, but I would like a little bit more time on these planets and on these adventures that we go on with these kids in the show. So that is one of my criticisms, and I would have liked the series to be longer overall, because, again, I'm not saying the last episode felt rushed, but a lot happened, and I would have liked there to be more closure in the finale. And I think if the finale was a longer episode, it's about 40 minutes, it's not a short episode, but if it was a longer episode, and if the finale was actually more like, I don't know, 2 or 3 episodes, then I think it could have been better. Again, I really enjoyed the finale. I don't want to sound like I didn't, but it wasn't my favourite episode in this series, because it felt like they're trying to do so much in a short amount of time. So yeah, those are my probably 2 biggest criticisms with this show. It should be longer, in my opinion, and the episodes should be longer as well. But at the same time, I got past all that because, and this, again, it's going to sound like faint praise, but I'm telling you now, it's not. I had so much fun watching this series, and I mean that in the best way possible, because in the end, Star Wars is meant to be fun. There are too many people online nowadays, and I'm a bit guilty of this as well. There are too many people online nowadays who say, why can't Star Wars be as, why can't it be serious and more like the Jude films? And I'm like, but that's not what Star Wars is. That's not what Star Wars has ever been. And the sun is shining right down on me right now, so that's why I look like I'm being blinded on this video. But yeah, that's not what Star Wars has ever been. Star Wars has never really been like Dune, which is ironic because it actually took a lot of inspiration from Dune. But Star Wars has always been a bit goofy and fun, silly. And guess what? Skeleton Crew leans into that, and that's one of the reasons it works. And that's one of the reasons it really works for me, because it was so enormously enjoyable to watch. Truly enormously enjoyable. I sat down to watch each episode of the series looking forward to just having some fun not just having some fun, having a lot of fun actually, for about the 30 minutes to 40 minutes that each episode played out for. Plus, I loved the characters. Jude Law is so good in this series. Jude Law is so good, and I was slightly worried that he wouldn't be, because sometimes you get a big actor in a franchise, and you can tell they're phoning it in. I didn't think it was particularly memorable in the Captain Marvel film, actually. So, I was a bit like, Jude Law in a Star Wars series, I'm not sure if he's going to probably be any good. He's fantastic. He's so good. I totally believe him as his character. And the great thing is, when I'm watching Skeleton Crew, I don't see Jude Law. I just see Jude, or the mysterious character that he is. And I love how that character is written, and how you're never quite sure whether to trust him or not. Even till the last moment of the last episode, I would argue. You're never quite sure. Well, his last appearance, would I say. It's not at the very end of the show, but his last appearance in the last episode, you're never quite sure whether to trust him or not. And I love how Jude Law plays that character. And you can tell he's having so much fun as well. There's a lot of times where he's tuning up the scenery, and it shouldn't work, but it does. So yeah, I thought Jude Law was brilliant in this series. Absolutely brilliant. I also thought the kids were wonderful as well. And again, this is going to sound like faint praise, but I can assure you now, it's not. The kids are not annoying in this series. Again, that might sound like faint praise, But it's not. I can't tell you how many times I watch a kid in a film or TV show, and I don't like saying this because it makes me sound mean, but you often watch a kid in a film or TV show and they can come across annoying, or they're just not good actors, you know? But the kids in Skeleton Crew, I mean, they almost verge on being annoying, but they're not annoying. They're actually really wonderful to watch. And, oh god, the sun's shining, man. I'm going to close my curtain. But they're not. They're just wonderful to watch. And that's the great thing about this series. You know, as a Star Wars fan, you can empathise. I was about to say sympathise. I don't want to make any sense. You can empathise with these kids as they're exploring the wonders of the galaxy, of the Star Wars galaxy, and they're excited and they're going along for the adventure, but they're also feeling a bit down. I was about to say sympathise with them again. No, you can empathise with them, and that's something I really love about their performances in this show. And I thought all the kids were just such a joy to watch. And Nick Frost, oh yeah, Nick Frost as the droid SM-33, which is a play on Smee, because there's a lot of pirate connections in this series, a lot of connections to Peter Pan and whatnot, and you know, Smee is a character in Peter Pan, so there's a little Peter Pan connection there. SM-33, voiced by Nick Frost in the series, is now my third favourite Star Wars droid, or fourth favourite. I think number one would be R2-D2, and then number two probably be C-3PO, and then it would be K2SO from Rogue One as number three, and I think number four would have to be SM-33 now, because I mean, there were so many moments when I was watching this show, and SM-33 did something, and I would just like go, yes! Because he was such an enjoyable droid to watch, and you can really tell that Nick Frost loved playing this droid. I mean, again, I don't know if he did for a fact, but it feels like he loved voicing this droid, and he just throws himself into it. Because unless you knew, I was watching this with a group of friends just before Christmas. I was watching the first couple episodes with them, and they didn't realise it was Nick Frost doing the voice. And so unless you know it's Nick Frost doing the voice of this droid, I think it just kind of seamlessly works, and that's a big plus with this show, because sometimes you get an actor doing a voice in something, in anything, you know, Star Wars or non-Star Wars, and it can be distracting, but it's not distracting in this series. And I think Nick Frost as SM-33 is just brilliant, and the character of SM-33, I mean, I would watch a whole film about that character, genuinely. Like, if they made a film all about that character, I'd be first in line to see it, because I love when there's a droid you feel emotionally attached to in the Star Wars galaxy, like R2-D2 or C-3PO and K2SO, and I felt that way with SM-33, and I want to see him in everything going forward, everything taking place around this time in the Star Wars galaxy. You know, there's rumours that characters from Skeleton Crew are going to show up in future Star Wars Disney Plus shows, or in one of the Star Wars movies like The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is coming out in the next couple of years. And I want him to be one of those characters which shows up, because every time he does, it just brings the biggest grin to my face. Plus, I love all the character development with all the kids in this show, and I love how the adults are intertwined into the show as well, the parents of the kids, because I thought the adults were just going to be a small factor of the show after the first episode, but actually they play quite a big role. And none of the adult actors, like Kerry Condon's in the show, she's an Oscar-nominated actress, and yet she doesn't feel like she's phoning it in. And I loved how the adult storyline sort of came together with the kid storyline in the last episode, or the last two episodes, should I say, of this series, because it just made everything feel more conclusive. And again, I think the conclusion of the show could have been better, but I did still think it had a conclusive ending, and I think a lot of that was also down to the subplot surrounding the adults, which is really good to watch. And I tell you why it's really good to watch, because of the mystery in this show. One of the big reasons this show works so well, at least in my opinion, is because of the mystery surrounding At-Atin, this planet which the kids that have gone missing are from, which the main kids that we follow are from, which the main characters are from. You know, how many times I'm going to say are from within 30 seconds? But you get the point I'm making. Yeah, At-Atin, there's this whole mystery surrounding the planet in the show. Like, whenever a character outside of At-Atin hears the name At-Atin, they're going like, wait, what? That doesn't exist. That's a mystery planet, that's a fairy tale planet, that's a treasure planet, or something like that. And they loved all that mystery because it added, I can't speak about it today, it added a narrative thrust to the series, which I was really surprised by, very pleasantly surprised by, and I mean that in the best way, because I didn't think there would be a narrative thrust with the series. I thought the series would be very playful, but actually it gets very serious and dark in part, and I think one of the reasons it manages to get dark at times is because of the whole mystery surrounding At-Atin, which I really liked, and I really liked the mystery surrounding, I loved the mystery surrounding who Jude Law's character was. I love when a show has a mystery element in there, and this show has two mystery elements in there. It has the whole mystery surrounding At-Atin and the whole mystery surrounding Jude Law's character Jude, and both of those mysteries had me engaged and were compelling and were well written and did offer answers which I felt satisfied by. Plus, I love the musical score by Mick Giacchino. Mick Giacchino is the son of Michael Giacchino, who did the score for Rogue One. So, you know, the guy who composed the score for Rogue One, his son did the score for this show, and it does have some similarities in the music to Rogue One, and I love the music to Rogue One, by the way. I know the music was heavily criticised to that film, but I love it. Anyway, a little side note there. I think the musical score to this series does such a fabulous job at really capturing the feel of this show, the feel of what it's like to be a kid in the Star Wars galaxy. And there are not many composers who can do that really well. I mean, John Williams is obviously one of them. He composed the music to all 9 main Star Wars movies, so we know he can do it so well. But I'm not sure of many other composers could do that. I mean, Michael Giacchino could probably do that, but he's not going to compose. He's a big name composer now. He's not going to compose the music to a TV show. So getting his son to do that, I think, helped because his son. I'm guessing his son's quite young. I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing his son is quite young, and I think having that sort of adolescent look into the music of the show adds an adolescent feel to the music, and I mean that as a big positive, because I was just listening to the main theme from the show yesterday when I was sorting through some books, and the musical score, I mean, again, it just made me feel like I was a kid in the Star Wars galaxy. And when the musical score can do that, you know it's doing something very right. And it also reminded me of Skeleton Crew, and that's what any good piece of Star Wars music should do. It should remind you of Star Wars. It should make you feel like you're in the Star Wars galaxy, and the musical score to this show does that. One last thing I'll say about the musical score is it's done by Mick Giacchino, as I've already said, who did the music to The Penguin. And the music to The Penguin is very, very different to the music to this show, and it really shows his range. And I can't wait to hear what Mick Giacchino does next. Actually, one more last thing I'll say about the music to the show. I think it's great. I think the music to the show is fabulous. But my one criticism, and this isn't really a criticism with Mick Giacchino, it's more of a criticism with the direction of these Star Wars Disney Plus shows, is I would have liked there to be more of those classic John Williams themes. Ahsoka had it. Ahsoka had those classic John Williams themes in there, but this show doesn't. I want to hear the Force theme when a character uses the Force. I want to hear, a bit of the Star Wars theme. Dum bum 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 bum. I want to hear that when the well, it's a bit of a spoiler actually, but I want to hear that when certain things happen in the series. I maybe want to hear a bit of the Resistance theme when Resistance characters show up in this show. I'm not saying that any of them do. I'm just saying you may or may not see X-Wings in this series. And I would have liked to hear, the Resistance theme by John Williams from Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Dom, bom, ba-da-dom, bom, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum. I would have loved to hear that when you see X-Wings show up in this show. Just a little hint of it. And you don't. I'm missing some of those John Williams themes in these Star Wars TV shows. And I hope they include them more going forward. I don't mind when a show like Andor doesn't do it, because I just don't mind it in that show, actually. I think it gets away with it. But when you have a show like this, which, reminds you of that kid you were when you fell in love with Star Wars, you want to hear those classic themes again. And I felt it was a bit of a missed opportunity that you didn't. So that'd be one of my criticisms with the music. I think the musical score is wonderful. I think Mick Giacchino did such a good job. But I think that there is still... there is still room for improvement. You need to get the John Williams themes back in there. Because that's truly going to make it feel like it connects to the Star Wars galaxy. And here's the thing. I've heard a lot of people say that they don't feel this show feels like Star Wars. They don't understand why it has to be a Star Wars TV show. I've also heard a lot of people say that it isn't original because it's like Stranger Things in space. So let's talk about the first point I made there. Did it need to be a Star Wars TV show? Maybe no. If I'm being completely honest, maybe it didn't need to be a Star Wars TV show. But the fact is, it is. And the reason I'm happy that it's a Star Wars TV show is because you're going to have, and hopefully this will happen, I don't know, maybe it's already happening, you're going to have a whole new generation of younger audiences being introduced to the Star Wars galaxy, and that's what you need. The amount of times I hear these... I'm stopping watching YouTube now because I'm getting sick of it, actually. The amount of times I hear these 40-year-old Star Wars fans moan about how they feel Star Wars has got too childish nowadays, and I'm like, but you were a child when you fell in love with Star Wars. That's the point of Star Wars. You want to introduce this version of Star Wars to younger audiences. And I think that's what Skeleton Crew is going to do and is doing so well. I think it's going to bring in a whole new generation of Star Wars fans. And I love that for two reasons. Because then we're going to get new Star Wars fans, new people growing up with Star Wars. And also because this show doesn't feel too connected to... Like I said, there were almost no connections to any of the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows or any of the Star Wars movies, And I love that because kids can just jump into Star Wars with this show, which is so enormously enjoyable to watch, and I think really captures the inner child in you, So yeah, I love that this is a Star Wars TV show. And to me, it does feel like Star Wars. It doesn't feel like the same Star Wars as, say, Andor or, say, The Acolyte, but it feels like John Watts' version of Star Wars, and sort of like the cousin to The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. And I actually really like the feel of this show. It's its own beast, And the other point that I made there, what was the other point that I made? Oh yeah, some people have been comparing this to Stranger Things and saying, well, it's not original because it just feels like Stranger Things in space. Here's the thing, I love Stranger Things, particularly the last season. Stranger Things 4 was absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. But Stranger Things is not original. It's not as original as you may think. There are original ideas in it for sure, but Stranger Things takes ideas off about 1 billion different things. If you don't believe me, just look it up. Stranger Things is not as original as you may think. Stranger Things in itself is evoking the likes of the Goonies and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And this series, Skeleton Crew, does that as well. So you can just make the same argument regarding Stranger Things as Skeleton Crew. And I do think Skeleton Crew evokes the likes of the Goonies and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, as I've already mentioned, but it also feels like its own thing. And it doesn't feel like it's copying Stranger Things. Like, there's no one character, none of the kids in this series had a dark past and magically shows up, and there's no upside down. There's no version of the upside down in Skeleton Crew. So it isn't just Stranger Things in space. And anybody who says that and says, oh, Skeleton Crew isn't too original because it's copying off Stranger Things, please just look into the context around Stranger Things. Stranger Things is copying off about 1 billion things in itself. So yes, Skeleton Crew might not be completely original, and it might be taking off ideas of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Goonies, Stand By Me, and whatnot. You know, classic 80s films that many people grew up watching. But that's one of the reasons I think it works so well. Because yes, it's taking ideas of those other things, and there are clear links to Peter Pan in there. You know, as I've already mentioned, and there are clear links to the likes of Pirates of the Caribbean. I think Jude Law's character is very much a Jack Sparrow type character in this show. I do think this show is, you know, I do think it's, what I'm trying to say here, I do think that this show exists off the success of those things I've just mentioned and off Stranger Things, but all the comparisons you can take the likes of, all the comparisons you can make to Skeleton Crew and Stranger Things, and Skeleton Crew and E.T. and Skeleton Crew and Goonies and Skeleton Crew and Skeleton Crew and Peter Pan feel earned. You know, it doesn't feel like it's just copying ideas of E.T. and whatnot. The ideas, what I'm trying to say here, the way it evokes the likes of E.T., Goonies, Stand By Me and all that jazz feels earned, and I like that about it. You know, yes, it is taking some ideas off those things, but it doesn't feel like it's copying them. It feels like a pastiche, I think that's the right word. You know, it feels like it's honouring those things that came before it and then putting its own spin on it. And I always like it when something does that. You know, Stranger Things feels like it's doing that. Stranger Things puts its own spin on the likes of the Goonies and E.T. And Skeleton Crew is doing that as well. But Skeleton Crew isn't just Stranger Things in space. It isn't just Stranger Things in the Star Wars galaxy. It's its own thing. And I mean that in the best way possible. And plus, I love the filmmaking of this show. I love how each director comes into the series and puts their own spin on it. And I must admit, I didn't love all the episodes in this series. That'd probably be my last criticism. I didn't love, I think it's episode 4, when they go to an old version of Atin. Well, not an old version, but they go to a different Atin type planet. I didn't love that episode, and I do think it could have been better directed, and I was kind of hoping it would be, because that was the episode directed by the Daniels, who not too long ago won an Oscar for their directing on the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. So I was a little surprised by how underwhelming I found that episode. I didn't hate it. I didn't really dislike it. I just thought it was an okay episode. Probably my least favourite episode in the bunch. But with all the other episodes, there's a direction with them that feels different from the direction with the other episodes, but also feels like it's, you know, it feels like it's continuing that same sort of feel as the other episodes as well. Hopefully I'm making sense there. I'm not sure how much I am. But basically what I'm saying is, yes, you have different creative and visionary directors working on the show, but the show still manages to feel like it's coming from the same vision, and yet it still has creative styles in there which are shown while still watching the show. I don't know how much I'm making sense there. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the show manages to carry on its vision from episode 1 to episode 8, but still manages to be creative in its own different ways, with various directors coming in each episode of this show. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, there's so much that I loved about this series. I love that they brought some of the old school Star Wars filmmaking into the series as well. Like, I think it's episode 6. There's a crab creature which you meet, and a part that was done with stop motion animation. There's a whole video that Star Wars put out online about how they created that crab creature for episode 6 of this show, and I loved how you brought some of that old, you know, Star Wars, that old school Star Wars filmmaking in this series. And this series just reminded me of why I fell in love with Star Wars in the first place. And I love that. I love whenever Star Wars puts something out and it does that. And you know what? I think it's what Star Wars needs right now. People are going to disagree with me there, and that's totally fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But I think that this is what Star Wars needs right now. I don't think it needs something like Andor. I mean, don't get me wrong, Andor's absolutely brilliant. I love Andor so much. But Andor's not going to really bring in a new generation of fans. It's not going to bring in a new, younger generation of fans. You know what I'm saying? Whilst this show will. And this show, I think, is going to remind so many viewers, so many Star Wars fans, when they finally get off their high horses and actually watch this show, it's going to remind them of that kid they were when they fell in love with Star Wars, because that's it in the end. Everyone fell in love with Star Wars when they were kids, or most people did. Maybe not everybody, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the chances are you were a kid when you fell in love with Star Wars. And I think watching this show, you're going to be reminded of that kid you were when you fell in love with Star Wars. And that's why I think this is what Star Wars and Lucasfilm at that need right now. This is the show I think Star Wars needs right now. You know, each episode of the show, I would sit down to watch, and I'd look forward to watching each episode. And, you know, some episodes are better than others, that's what he said. But that happens with any show. And the thing is, I would sit down to watch each episode of this series, and I'd be like, oh, is it going to capture that same magic, and that same wonder, and that same, you know, energy, that same... Is it going to reawaken my inner child, the inner child that made me fall in love with Star Wars in the first place? That, you know, is it going to do that as I watch each episode of this series? But somehow it managed to do that. I sat down questioning, is it going to do that? Is it going to do that? And you know what? It managed to. And I loved it. I thought it was enormously enjoyable to watch. And I mean that in the best way possible. And sure, I may not love it the same way I love Andor, and I don't think it's quite as great as The Mandalorian Season 2. But you know what? I think this is one of the best Star Wars Disney Plus TV shows you've had so far. And I'm so happy to say that. Because I was worried, but I was very pleasantly surprised with this series. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Skeleton Crew, I'm going to say that it's an 8.5 out of 10. I want to see a continuation. I want to see season 2. Heck, I want to see a season 3. I want to see these kids grow up over time, and I want to see the adventures that they go on in the Star Wars galaxy. I'm not quite sure how you can continue it in the same way you've done the first series with the ending that this series has, but at the same time, there is room left for a season 2. And I was about to say something there, but it's a bit of a spoiler, and I don't want to do any more. I don't want to do any spoilers for this podcast today, but I want to see how certain characters' storylines are going to continue. Let's just say that. And yeah, I mean, I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say in this podcast today about this show. I'm just so happy that it's good. I mean, it's not just good, it's great! You know, it's fantastic. I've been watching each episode, and I couldn't believe how much I was into it, and how much I was smiling, because, again, it just made me feel like that kid again. That kid that all those years ago watched The Phantom Menace for the first time and couldn't believe what he was watching, and fell in love with it. And, yeah, I loved this show. And that is why I'm going to say once more that Skeleton Crew is an 8. Is it going to turn on? Apparently it's not going to turn on. Is an 8. Is it going to turn on? It's not going to turn on, apparently. Is it going to turn on? There we go. It is an 8.5 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Skeleton Crew, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below, and please be respectful. You know, everyone's got an opinion on Star Wars, and so if you didn't love the show, that's totally fine. But please don't come at me in the comment section below. You know, it's just a TV show at the end of the day. It's just a TV show. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts on this show in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts and many more videos coming very, very soon on this channel. As I've already said, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast. And we got there in the end, didn't we? I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.